Brooklyn, New York, January 1979. Tommy DeSimone walks into a small storefront expecting induction into the Lucchese crime family. Becoming a made man means protection, status, and power. Inside the Mafia, harming a made member requires approval from the highest level. But years earlier, DeSimone had crossed a rule older than any crew: the killing of Gambino member William "Billy Bats" Benfena in 1970. Debts like that rarely disappear. By the winter of 1979, the question was no longer if it would be answered, only when. And the man who could quietly allow it was Paul Vario. If you value real organized crime history, consider subscribing. Paul Vario's quiet authority, Brooklyn, New York, late 1960s. In neighborhoods like East New York and Brownsville, Paul Vario looked like a successful local businessman. He owned restaurants and social clubs where people gathered to talk, gamble, and quietly conduct business. To outsiders, he was simply another respected figure in the community. Inside the Lucchese crime family, Vario held a much more powerful role. He was a captain, a man responsible for supervising crews that generated money for the organization. His authority came not from public displays of violence, but from control over profitable operations. Under his supervision ran gambling rooms, loan sharking businesses, and truck hijacking crews moving through Brooklyn and Queens. Associates carried out the risky work on the street. Soldiers supervised them and ensured discipline inside the crew. Above them all, Vario maintained the structure that kept money flowing upward to the Lucchese leadership. Captains like Vario rarely needed to act directly. Their influence came from management, approving operations, settling disputes, and keeping the organization stable. That quiet authority made them some of the most powerful figures in organized crime. Historical records confirm Vario's role as a Lucchese capo regime who controlled a major Brooklyn crew involved in hijacking and other rackets. In that world, power did not always belong to the loudest man. Often it belonged to the one who controlled the system. The business structure of a Mafia crew. A Mafia crew functioned less like a street gang and more like a small business with a clear hierarchy. At the top stood the captain, in this case Paul Vario. His responsibility was to supervise the crew's operations and deliver a portion of its earnings to the leadership of the Lucchese crime family. He did not carry out most of the crimes himself. Instead, he directed the structure beneath him. Below him were soldiers, fully initiated members of the Mafia. Soldiers supervised specific rackets, managed groups of associates, and enforced discipline when rules were broken. They ensured that debts were collected and that disputes did not disrupt the crew's profits. At the bottom were associates, men who worked with the organization but were not formally inducted. Associates handled much of the daily activity. Some hijacked trucks, others ran gambling rooms, transported stolen goods, or collected payments from loan shark customers. Money moved upward through this structure. Associates generated income, soldiers supervised the operations, and the captain took a share before passing profits to the family leadership. This system allowed the organization to survive individual losses. If one associate disappeared, another replaced him. As long as the rackets kept producing money, the structure remained intact. Tommy DeSimone, a profitable but dangerous associate. Within Paul Vario's crew, associates formed the working layer of the operation. They were not officially inducted into the Mafia, but they generated much of the money that kept the system running. One of the most aggressive among them was Tommy DeSimone, born in 1950 in Queens, New York. DeSimone grew up around men connected to organized crime. By his late teens, he was already involved with figures linked to Vario's Brooklyn crew. He developed a reputation for taking risks, participating in truck hijackings, intimidating debtors, and enforcing the crew's authority on the street. That willingness made him useful. Cargo theft operations required men who could act quickly and handle pressure without drawing attention. DeSimone fit that role well and earned money through the crew's activities. But the same traits that made him valuable also made him dangerous. Associates like DeSimone operated outside the formal Mafia hierarchy. They could earn large sums, yet they did not have the protection that came with being a made member. For the leadership above them, associates were essential but replaceable. As long as they produced money and followed orders, they were tolerated. When they became unpredictable or created problems, the organization could remove them without threatening the business itself. JFK Airport, the profit machine. During the 1970s, John F. Kennedy International Airport in Queens, New York, became a major target for organized crime. Its cargo terminals moved enormous volumes of goods every day: electronics, clothing, liquor, and other valuable shipments traveling across the country and overseas. For crews connected to the Lucchese crime family, the airport became a dependable source of profit. The system relied on information. Truck drivers, warehouse employees, and union contacts sometimes quietly passed along details about valuable cargo, when shipments arrived, where they were stored, and when trucks would leave the terminal. With the right tip, a hijacking could happen quickly. Paul Vario's crew was closely tied to this network. Associates tracked cargo schedules and identified shipments worth stealing. Once a truck left the airport area, hijacking crews could intercept it on nearby roads. The stolen goods were then moved through buyers who resold them through small businesses and warehouses across the city. Electronics, clothing, and liquor disappeared into legitimate markets, while the profits flowed upward through the Mafia hierarchy, from associates to soldiers, then to captains like Vario. For the men involved, JFK Airport functioned less like a transportation hub and more like a steady supply line feeding organized crime. Subscribe for more documented investigations into organized crime. Violence as a business tool. In organized crime, violence was rarely random. It served a purpose: control. Within Mafia crews, threats and force were used to enforce rules and protect income. Debtors who refused to pay loan shark interest could face intimidation or assault. Rival criminals interfering with business might be warned or removed. The goal was discipline, not chaos. Associates like Tommy DeSimone often carried out these actions. Working at the street level, they handled disputes and built reputations that discouraged resistance. But the decisions behind violence usually came from above. Captains and senior members rarely carried out the acts themselves. Instead, they approved actions that protected the organization's interests. When a rule was broken, especially involving members of another mafia family, the consequences could become serious. Such violations threatened the balance between crime families and demanded a response. Violence inside organized crime followed its own internal logic. It enforced discipline, protected profits, and maintained order. Men like DeSimone carried out the acts. The authority behind them came from leaders who never appeared at the scene. The Billy Bats killing, a rule that could not be broken. June 1970, Brooklyn, New York. William Billy Bats Benfena returned to the neighborhood after serving several years in prison. Bats was not just another street figure. He was a made member of the Gambino crime family, a status protected by strict rules within the Mafia hierarchy. Among the 5 families of New York, harming a made member without permission from his bosses was considered a serious violation. Such acts could create conflict between entire organizations. According to later testimony from informants and investigators, Bats became involved in a confrontation with members of Paul Vario's crew. Tommy DeSimone was among those present. What began as an argument reportedly turned violent, and Bats was beaten and later killed. The issue was not only the violence itself. It was who the victim represented. Bats belonged to another Mafia family, and his death created a debt that could not easily be ignored. For a time, the situation remained unresolved. Organized crime families often avoided immediate retaliation when larger business interests were at stake, but violations like this were rarely forgotten. For Tommy DeSimone, the killing of Billy Bats became a shadow that followed him for years. Some debts in organized crime simply waited to be collected. When profit turns into risk. By the late 1970s, the landscape around organized crime in New York was beginning to shift. Federal investigators were expanding surveillance against mafia families. Wiretaps, informants, and long-term conspiracy cases were becoming common tools for prosecutors. In this environment, stability became increasingly important. Captains needed crews that could produce steady income without attracting unnecessary attention from law enforcement or rival organizations. Tommy DeSimone's reputation, however, was becoming a concern. Within criminal circles, stories about his temper and unpredictable behavior circulated widely. While he remained a capable earner through hijacking and other rackets, the risks surrounding him were becoming harder to overlook. Organizations built on hierarchy depend on discipline. Associates are expected to follow orders and avoid actions that could threaten the larger operation. When someone repeatedly disrupts that balance, leaders must weigh his value against the danger he brings. At the same time, the unresolved issue surrounding the killing of Billy Batts still lingered. Even years later, it remained a sensitive matter between Mafia families. For Paul Vario and those above him in the hierarchy, the calculation was becoming clearer. In organized crime, profit matters, but protecting the stability of the system matters more. Authorization without a weapon, January 1979, Brooklyn, New York. Tommy DeSimone vanished without explanation. According to accounts that later surfaced through informants and investigators, he had been expecting an important meeting connected to his criminal career. Instead, he was never seen again. The exact details remain uncertain. Organized crime killings were rarely documented, and participants almost never spoke openly about them. But investigators and historians have long believed DeSimone's disappearance followed a familiar pattern inside Mafia culture. When someone becomes a liability, the decision to remove him often comes quietly from higher levels of the organization. The men who carry out the act are rarely the ones who make the decision. Authority moves downward through the hierarchy, while responsibility remains distant. For DeSimone, several factors may have contributed to that decision, including his volatile reputation and the unresolved issues surrounding the death of Billy Batts. What is known with certainty is that DeSimone disappeared in January 1979 and was later presumed dead, a fate widely linked to those earlier events. Historical documentation confirms both his role as a Lucchese associate and his mysterious disappearance. In organized crime, power often belongs to the men who never appear at the scene. The organization continues. After Tommy DeSimone disappeared in January 1979, the operations connected to Paul Vario's crew did not collapse. The rackets continued largely unchanged. Organized crime groups were built to survive the loss of individuals. Cargo theft operations tied to John F. Kennedy International Airport in Queens continued moving stolen goods into New York's markets. Trucks carrying electronics, clothing, and liquor were still targeted when opportunities appeared. The merchandise was quickly resold through buyers who moved it through small businesses and warehouses across the city. Illegal gambling also remained a steady source of income. Card games and sports betting rings continued operating across Brooklyn neighborhoods, bringing regular cash into the crew. Within the organization, responsibilities simply shifted. Associates who once worked with DeSimone continued under other soldiers and supervisors. The hierarchy remained intact, and profits continued moving upward through the Lucchese family. This continuity was intentional. Mafia crews were structured so the business could survive the loss of any single member. By the end of the 1970s, the rackets across Brooklyn and Queens were still producing money. One man was gone. The system remained. The power of permission. Paul Vario's authority inside the Lucchese crime family came from control rather than visibility. As a captain, his role was to manage rackets, settle disputes, and ensure that money flowed upward through the organization. Leaders like Vario rarely carried out violence themselves. Instead, power moved through approval. Decisions were made quietly among captains and senior members, while the actual acts were carried out by soldiers or associates. This distance protected leadership from the risks faced by the men on the street while allowing them to maintain control over the organization. Tommy DeSimone's disappearance reflected that structure. The exact details remain uncertain, but the pattern matched how organized crime operated. When someone became a threat to stability, the decision to remove him often came from higher levels of the hierarchy. The men remembered for violence were usually those who carried it out. Yet the deeper power within the Mafia belonged to those who decided when it would happen. In that world, authority was rarely loud. Often it was simply the power to give or withhold permission. The bottom line: the men who decide. Tommy DeSimone became infamous for violence. Stories about his temper and brutality still circulate in crime history. But men like DeSimone were never the true center of power. That authority belonged to figures like Paul Vario, the men who controlled the structure behind the crimes. They managed the money, enforced the rules, and decided when someone had become a problem the organization could no longer carry. In organized crime, the person who pulls the trigger is visible. The person who approves the decision often remains in the background. Tommy DeSimone vanished. The system continued, and that raises a question that still echoes through the history of organized crime. Who truly holds the power? The man who commits the act, or the one who decides it must happen? If you value real organized crime history, consider subscribing for more.